Hi, my name is Yasin Zerwal. I will guide you in this lesson, which is a lesson from the NSE5 Network Security Expert Analyst. FortiManager High Availability. This lesson will cover the following: High Availability Overview, Configuring High Availability, Monitoring High Availability Status. High Availability Overview. FortiManager High Availability provides a solution to enhance reliability of FortiManager by protecting the data in the FortiManager database from being lost if the FortiManager unit fails. This can be achieved by dynamically backing up FortiManager database changes to one or more backup FortiManager units. Then, if the operating FortiManager unit fails, a backup FortiManager unit can take the place of the failed unit. A FortiManager high availability cluster consists of up to 5 FortiManager units of the same FortiManager model. One of the FortiManager units in the cluster operates as a primary or master unit, and the other 1 to 4 units operate as a backup units. All of the units are visible on the network. The primary unit and the backup units can be at the same location. FortiManager High Availability also supports geographical redundancy, so the primary unit and the backup units can be in different locations attached to different networks, as long as communication is possible between them. For example, over the internet, over a WAN, or through a private network. Administrators connect to the primary unit using GUI, Graphic User Interface, or CLI command line interface to perform FortiManager operations. Managed devices connect with the primary unit for configuration, backup, and restore. If FortiManager is used to distribute firmware updates and FortiGuard updates to managed devices, the managed devices can connect to the primary unit or one of the backup units. If the primary FortiManager unit fails, you must manually configure one of the backup units to become the primary unit. The new primary unit will have the same IP address as it did when it was the backup unit. There is no automation in this process. You must manually configure the FortiManager unit when it fails. A reboot of the FortiManager unit is not required when it is promoted from a slave to the master. Synchronizing the FortiManager configuration and high availability heartbeat. All changes to the FortiManager database are saved on the primary unit, and then these changes are synchronized to the backup units. The FortiManager configuration of the primary unit is also synchronized to the backup units, except for the high availability parameters. Also, all firmware images and all FortiGuard data stored by the device manager are synchronized to the backup units. As a result, the backup units always match the primary unit. So if the primary unit fails, a backup unit can be configured to take the place of the primary unit and continue functioning as a standalone FortiManager unit. While the FortiManager cluster is operating, all backup units in the cluster exchange high availability heartbeat packets with the primary unit, so that the primary unit can verify the status of the backup units, and the backup units can verify the status of the primary unit. The high availability synchronization between the primary and the secondary FortiManager is performed over SSL using TCP port 5199. Please note that the high availability synchronization is also known as the high availability heartbeat. High availability heartbeat monitoring, as well as FortiManager database and configuration synchronization, takes place using the connections between the FortiManager units in the cluster. You can isolate high availability traffic to specific FortiManager interfaces and connect those interfaces together so that they function as synchronization interfaces between the FortiManager units in the cluster. Communication between the units in the cluster must be maintained for the high availability cluster to operate. By isolating high availability heartbeat and synchronization packets from your network, you can save bandwidth. If the primary unit or a backup unit fails, the backup unit stops receiving high availability heartbeat packets from the primary unit. If one of the backup unit fails, the primary unit stops receiving high availability heartbeat packets from the backup unit. In either case, the cluster is considered down until it is reconfigured. If the primary unit has failed, this means you need to manually configure one of the backup units to be the primary unit and add in peer IPs for all of the remaining backup units to the new primary unit configuration, and configure the backup units to point to the new primary unit. If a backup unit has failed, you reconfigure the cluster by removing the peer IP of the failed backup unit from the primary unit configuration. Now we will go to the lab. But before doing that, I need to change the network configuration so the remote backup units and the primary units can communicate with each other. And that will happen by configuring the appropriate firewalls or routers to allow the heartbeat of high availability and synchronization traffic to pass between the primary unit and the remote backup units. Please note that the high availability traffic uses TCP port 5199. Now I will log into the FortiManager. This FortiManager will be the master in our configuration. So we need to go to the system setting, high availability. Here at the cluster setting, because this is a FortiManager master, we need to select master as an operational mode. Selecting master as operation mode, and here in the peer IP, I need to enter the IP address of the FortiManager, the backup units, which is 192.168.1.92. Here I need to enter the serial number of the FortiManager backup units. To get the serial number, I need to go to System Setting tab, Dashboard, and copy the serial number from here. For the cluster ID, which is a number that identifies the high availability cluster, please keep in mind that all members of the high availability cluster must have the same cluster ID. That means if I enter, for example, here 2 as a cluster ID, I need to enter 2 also as a cluster ID in all other peers. So I will keep the default, which is 1. I can enter from 1 up to 64. If I enter here 1, I need also to enter 1 as a cluster ID and all other peers. For the group password, which is a password for the high availability cluster, also here all the members of the high availability cluster must have the same group password. The maximum group password length is 19 characters. And this is because demonstration, I will not enter a password here. For the file quota, which is the maximum hard limit of hard disk space that the high availability master can use to synchronize data to the slaves. High availability will reset itself if the limit is reached. If the limit of the file quota, which is here 4096 megabytes, exactly 4 gigabytes. For the heartbeat interval, which is the time in seconds that the cluster unit waits between sending the heartbeat packets, which is also the amount of the time that the FortiManager units wait before expecting to receive a heartbeat packets from the other cluster units. Please note that the file quota and heartbeat interval and file over units can only be configured here on the FortiManager master. Regarding the failover threshold, which is the number of heartbeat intervals that one of the cluster units waits to receive the high availability heartbeat packets from the other cluster units before assuming that the other cluster units have failed. I will keep the default. Those 35 quota, heartbeat interval, and failover threshold only can be configured only here in the FortiManager master unit. I will click apply, and I will go to the FortiManager peer, which is the FortiManager backup units, to do the configuration of high availability. For the cluster setting, I will choose slave as operational mode. Here I will enter the peer IP of the FortiManager master unit, and here I will enter the peer serial number, which is the serial number of the FortiManager master unit. I will keep the default, the cluster ID, because I did enter one as a cluster ID in the FortiManager master unit. So here I need to keep the same cluster ID as the FortiManager master unit. For the group password, I did not enter group password at the FortiManager master unit. Also, I will do the same here, because this is only a demonstration. As I said before, I cannot configure file quota or heartbeat interval or failover threshold at the FortiManager backup units. I will click apply. I can enter more than peer IPs at the FortiManager master unit. You can see here HA slave. That means this FortiManager is a slave, and I cannot do any configuration changes here at the HA slave. It is read only, so I cannot do any configuration. To show the synchronization that's happened between the master and the slave, I will do some configuration changes on the master. I will go to the policy and object. I will edit this policy. Destination address, which is external DNS server, I will change it to, for example, all. After doing this configuration changes, to apply the changes on the FortiGate unit, I need to install the configuration changes from the device manager or policies and objects to the managed devices, which is in this case FortiGate. This is another topic. Here in this lesson, I'm focusing on the high availability configuration and to show you the synchronization that's happened between the master and slave. Now I will go to the FortiManager slave to see if the configuration changes synchronize it and between the master and slave. We need to refresh, and you can see the destination becomes all. That means the synchronization is happened between the master and slave. For the monitoring high availability status, to monitor the status of the FortiManager units in operating high availability cluster, we can do it in two ways. Using the graphic user interface, I will show you. We need to go to System Setting, High Availability. You can see three things here. The role of each cluster unit, whether it is master or slave, and you can see, and also the high availability status, whether it is up or down. Up, if this cluster unit is receiving high availability heartbeat packets from all of its configured peers, or down if the cluster unit is not receiving high availability heartbeat packets from one or more of its configured peers. The other thing that we can see here is the high availability configuration of the cluster, which is the cluster setting. We can also see the high availability status using the CLI command line interface by going to System Settings tab, Dashboard, and you can go to CLI console and issue one command, which is get system HA. Here we can see the mode, which is the master, and all other cluster setting, which is cluster ID, file quota, heartbeat interval, heartbeat loss threshold, which is 3 here, which is failover threshold. I want to mention something regarding the configuration of this heartbeat interval and failover threshold. For example, here we have a heartbeat interval which is 5 seconds, and heartbeat loss threshold, which is the failover threshold, which is 3 times. That means the failure detected will be after 15 seconds. Exactly, the failure will be detected equal the amount of heartbeat interval multiplied by failover threshold, which is 15 seconds. Thank you very much for your viewing.